Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and to help you engage with the Texas legislature. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and today we're talking about the border. Texas is once again in the national news in ways that run counter to our faith values. With all the news about immigration and border issues at the national and state level, it's getting hard to keep track of all the issues. So we invited Kristin Etter to the program to sort it all out for you. Kristin is the Director of Policy and Legal Services at the Texas Immigration Law Council. Previously, she served as the Special Project Director of Operation Lone Star at Texas RioGrande Legal Aid, where she developed and implemented the litigation response to Operation Lone Star. Kristin will help us understand where we are with Operation Lone Star and Senate Bill 4 passed in the fourth special session, and where the court battle over Senate Bill 4 implementation stands. I'll note that we recorded this Tuesday, February 13th, since she mentions a couple of days and dates. Kristin's organization, the Texas Immigration Law Council, is also co-hosting a webinar with Texas Impact February 27th at 5 o'clock p.m., so go to texasimpact.org and click on the events page to learn more or sign up, or check out the link in the show notes. While you're there, check out all of the other Texas Impact events and make sure to sign up for one near you. Y'all, now is that time. We have talked about the importance of these primary elections since early in the last legislative session, early last year, and early voting begins next week. So make sure you're doing your homework on the races in your district and make a plan to vote. And make sure to invite some friends to join you. Y'all, we've been preaching it, but one more time for those in the back. Primary elections drive public policy in Texas. So if you care about the border or reproductive health or public schools or any of the other issues that we talk about in this program, you have to participate in the primaries. And because these are super low turnout elections, any effort to mobilize friends or congregations could make a difference. I trust that you're doing the work, and I'm excited to see how you engage in the coming weeks. If you need more resources, check out Texas Impact's Texas Faith Votes resources. But for now, back to the border. I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Kristin Etter. Joining us for today's conversation is Kristin Etter, Director of Policy and Legal Services at the Texas Immigration Law Council. Kristin previously served in a position to implement the litigation response to Operation Lone Star. Kristin, we know there is a lot of legal work going on in response to Texas's actions on the border, and I think I can say safely on behalf of all of our listeners that we wish you were having a slower start to your new year. How are you holding up so far?
Yes. Thanks, Scott. And good morning to all. Yes, it's been extremely busy as we are seeking to kind of keep up and respond to what is happening in Texas, both along the border as well as at the Texas legislature, what's happened over the last couple special sessions, and getting ready to kind of move into a new landscape of Operation Lone Star in March as the implementation date to Senate Bill 4 looms the next few weeks.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about another opportunity for people to learn more in a webinar that we are co-hosting with you. But before we jump into everything that's happening, talk to us about the Texas Immigration Law Council. Who are you, and what are y'all working on?
Yeah, so the Texas Immigration Law Council is a new nonprofit organization that started last fall. And we seek to do two things. So the first is we provide service and support to refugees and immigrants throughout Texas through partnering with legal services providers and seeking to support providers as well as immigrants. Our second wing of the council is essentially a policy arm, and we seek to advance and start a movement for nonpartisan, reasonable immigration reform at both the state and federal levels.
Speaking of the policy arm and work that's going on in Texas, you have worked extensively on Operation Lone Star. Talk to us about that and how it's adding to the chaos of what's going on at the border currently.
Yeah, sure. So in my prior role at Texas RioGrande Legal Aid as special project director, we implemented the litigation response. Our organization was the first organization to take the first 750 men that were arrested under Operation Lone Star in the fall of 2021. So Operation Lone Star really started out in that time period, and essentially is the general way I can describe it is the criminalization of immigration in Texas in an attempt to punish and deter immigration. And so Operation Lone Star does this by misappropriating the criminal justice system to create a separate, substandard, and unequal system of justice to prosecute migrants under the guise of a criminal trespass prosecution. And so to date, I believe there have been close to 15,000 arrests for criminal trespass since the summer of 2021.
And what's the impact on South Texas? What's the impact on humans?
So essentially what you see along the Texas-Mexico border are arrests in mass of migrants, many of whom are asylum seekers, many others who are here to work in Texas and throughout the country. And so what you see is essentially, and Operation Lone Star has gone through several different iterations, but the most current version of it is this militarization of the border and what we see kind of happening right now in Eagle Pass in Maverick County. It's essentially the militarization of a border and the continuation of this mass arrest of migrants for criminal trespass, many who are here seeking asylum. And I will say that rather than act as a deterrent, Operation Lone Star has really acted as an attractant by attracting people to the presence of law enforcement. So unlike the stated purpose of a deterrent factor, what we've seen, especially in the last year and a half, as the demographic of migrants have changed under the program and the areas where they've decided to militarize have changed. But what we see is migrants are actually attracted to the presence of law enforcement, and that is because they are fleeing danger and seeking safety. And so when they see the military and when they see Texas law enforcement along the border, they are attracted to them. And so that's why we've seen such an increase exponentially in arrests and in terms of migrant crossings in the areas where Operation Lone Star is most heavily present.
Interesting. I had not heard that piece, so I appreciate you sharing that with us. So in addition to all of that, we now have, after the number of special sessions last year, the most recent version of Senate Bill 4. Talk to us about Senate Bill 4. What does it do and how does it add to what's happening currently at the border?
So Senate Bill 4 from the fourth special session, what it does is essentially there are two main components. The first component of Senate Bill 4 is it has created three new criminal state immigration crimes. The first one is an illegal entry charge. The second one is a state illegal reentry charge. And the third one is a failure to comply with order to return to a foreign nation. So that's the first component, is it creates these new crimes in Texas for immigrants. The second major component is it turns every judge in Texas into a de facto immigration judge. And it both authorizes and requires, in some instances, or actually in all instances of conviction for one of these crimes, that the state judge issue an order of removal, essentially a state level deportation. So it essentially has co-opted the entire peace officer force in Texas and turned them into ICE agents. And it also has co-opted the entire judiciary in Texas and has turned all Texas judges, from a Supreme Court justice all the way down to a JP judge, into de facto immigration judges, both authorizing and requiring them to order immigrants deported.
All right, Kristin, I'm not a lawyer, but this seems to me to clearly cause constitutional issues. Talk us through some of those and how you see those being resolved.
Sure. Well, there are several lawsuits pending right now, but specifically the two lawsuits that have been filed against Senate Bill 4, one by the Department of Justice and the other on behalf of the TCRP and ACLU have filed on behalf of advocacy groups. And essentially, they have challenged Senate Bill 4 as being unconstitutional. And I think any legal scholar or any serious lawyer with any kind of legal training will tell you that this is clearly an unconstitutional law. And that is because it's clearly unconstitutional at both federal, decades of Supreme Court precedent, as well as U.S. constitutional law. And that is solely because immigration policy is the job of the federal government. And again, that is rooted in both the U.S. Constitution as well as decades of jurisprudence. And so it really is about just these very basic levels of constitutionality, in addition to basic understanding and components of federalism and how states are supposed to abide by federal government policies and laws.
So what are the next steps in those lawsuits, and where are we in that process?
So the 15th of this month, we have a hearing. There is a hearing set in U.S. District Court in Austin, and that is a preliminary injunction hearing where both of the lawsuits have sought to enjoin or stop Senate Bill 4 from going into effect. The current implementation date of Senate Bill 4 is the current implementation date of Senate Bill 4 is March 5th. And so these lawsuits are seeking to stop the law from going into effect. And so we hope to see a decision at the trial court level within a week, I think is what the judge has said, that he intends to have a decision relatively quickly. And then whatever that decision is, either side is likely to then appeal that to the Fifth Circuit. And I think anybody who's been watching what's going on in Texas has also anticipated a Supreme Court, that this will likely end up in the Supreme Court at some point. So I think the real question and the real concern for Texans everywhere is whether or not we are going to have an implementation and whether or not this law will be implemented and how it's going to look. Because again, these laws are not specific to the border. They are statewide laws that have statewide applications and will leave immigrants statewide subject to being arrested, prosecuted, and deported.
And so, fingers crossed, this doesn't get implemented, but I think you and others are preparing for life in case it does. And so, Texas Impact is co-sponsoring with the Texas Immigration Law Council a webinar taking place February 27th. Talk to us about who should come to that, why they should come, and what you plan on covering.
Right. So at this webinar that we're hosting in conjunction with Texas Impact on the 27th, we will be providing an overview of what SB 4 does and what SB 4 doesn't do. In addition, we will be providing steps and different tools that the communities and people that might be impacted and people that know people that might be impacted can use in their and can understand how to protect somebody who could be impacted by a Senate Bill 4 prosecution and what they can do. So we're really going to talk about, there have been a lot of misunderstandings about what this law is and what it isn't. And so we're going to really go through exactly what each of these new laws is going to do and how people can protect themselves and their communities. And also really, at large, what we're talking about is, again, the targeting of immigrants and the criminalization. It's really a further kind of a step up from what has been currently happening under Operation Lone Star. This is the next phase. And people all over Texas are going to be subject to these laws. So we're going to talk about who could be potentially stopped, who could be potentially arrested, prosecuted, and deported. And what is surprising to most people as we go through these laws is that this impacts people that are lawfully present in Texas. So not just people that have recently crossed the border irregularly, but these laws have the potential to impact those immigrants in Texas that are lawfully present in Texas. They're still subject to arrest under these laws.
Yeah, and I think something important that you mentioned in that answer is this isn't just for folks in South Texas. This will impact the entire state, whether you're in Dallas, Houston, or anywhere in between. And so it really is important for faith leaders, for people involved in faith communities to understand how this is going to impact your community. So I think it's an important webinar, and we're looking forward to participating in that. Kristin, beyond the webinar, is there anything else that you hope listeners and Texans of Faith will do in response to everything that's going on at the border?
Yes. So I would hope that people in Texas feel passionate enough about these issues and about how these issues are going to affect them in their daily lives that they get activated enough to get involved in their communities in any way possible. So some of the concrete examples that I can give is speak to your local representatives, ask them why they voted for Senate Bill 4. Figure out ways that you can get involved in your community with some of the organizations that help immigrants or that are legal services providers for immigrants, and ask them how you can help, how you can get involved. In addition, a lot of this is really going to come back to local officials. How are local law enforcement officials going to implement Senate Bill 4? And so, in doing all of these trainings and speaking with people around the state, many law enforcement officers have said they don't want to be ICE agents. They don't want to be enforcing immigration law. And, for many reasons. First of all, they're not trained in the area. Immigration law is very complex and complicated. And these laws did not involve any other additional component of training. So you're essentially asking every peace officer in Texas to become these experts in immigration law, and not only just have them be experts, but also then implementing it in a way that could subject people that are lawfully present to arrest, prosecution, and deportation. So many law enforcement officers have indicated that they don't want to do this. They have no need in their communities. They want to focus their resources on violent crimes and other crimes that make their communities less safe, and they don't want to start becoming immigration officers and erode trust within their communities, because as we know, that makes communities less safe. So what I would also tell people is work with local law enforcement. They don't have to prioritize Senate Bill 4 offenses. They have limited resources, and those resources could be allocated in other areas. So asking them to deprioritize Senate Bill 4 offenses, I think, is a huge part of how, and again, it remains to be seen how different communities are going to respond. Many local law enforcement officers have already come out to say they don't have the resources to do this, they don't want to do this, and really they don't have to do this. So I would also encourage folks to get with their local government officials. Also work within your church, your churches, and ask the churches to take a stance of solidarity with immigrants around Texas, because as we know, in terms of there's a lot of concern about the social harms that can come from not taking care of people in our community, and also criminalizing people in our community, and imagining the ripple effects that this could have if you're going to be rounding up immigrants in Texas and trying to deport them, what that would do to our communities, to our schools, to our businesses, and really to our economy and our own individual lives as well. So this really can affect all Texans, not just immigrants. But I would just say taking a stand of solidarity with immigrants throughout the state.
Amen. There are a lot of opportunities to get involved, so I hope folks will take some notes today and consider how you can help both educate and protect your communities, our communities. Kristin, really appreciate the time today. Any shameless plugs, any other information you want to hit before we leave? Anywhere that we can get more information?
Yeah, I was going to mention we've created a lot of content and materials on our website, which is www.txilc.org. And if you go under the resources tab, we have created lots of frequently asked questions and answers, and some flow charts that help people better understand what these laws do and don't do. And those are downloadable forms. And there's also some information about knowing your rights and what you can do in certain situations. I would also direct folks to endlonestar.com. That's another movement that has been going in our state for some time, about different ways and ways that people can get involved to end Operation Lone Star. Because again, at the end of the day, this really is about the criminalization of immigration in Texas. And I think as Texans, we know that that is not the solution to the issues that we're facing along the Texas-Mexico border and at large when it comes to immigration. Criminalizing entire groups of people, especially because Texas has such a high number of immigrants. And really, at the end of the day, we are all immigrants for the most part. So it's really about trying to push back against the criminalization of immigration in Texas. And there are lots of ways that you can get involved. And I would encourage your listeners to go to that website as well. I didn't even really get to talk about Senate Bill 4 from the third special session, but I will talk about that in my webinar. And that is the human smuggling statute. I didn't really get to mention it because most people that one is not tied up in litigation at all. That one has already been implemented as of February 6th. It is a new law, and it really just enhances the mandatory minimum punishment. And it didn't change the text of the statute, but it does have a way that it interplays with this new SB 4 that could be very problematic. I'll be covering that at the presentation as well.
All right. Making a note for our producer, David, to get some of those links in the show notes, and we'll also provide a link to register for the webinar. I know we'll all be watching for news about the court cases as they move forward. Is there anywhere that you think has particularly good coverage of that?
Yes. So the Texas Tribune has been great at covering the local legal battles. Also, Dallas Morning News has been an excellent source. The Houston Chronicle has been an excellent source of news. And because Texas has unfortunately gotten into this Texas national battle, it really has escalated the national coverage. So I'd also say the New York Times, CNN. I think everybody is watching these battles very closely because they do have such large implications beyond U.S. immigration policy.
All right, Kristin, well, I really appreciate the time today, and really appreciate the work you're doing every day on behalf of Texans and our community. So thanks again.
Thanks, Scott.
I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Kristin Etter. I'm grateful for her leadership and the many ways the Immigration Law Council is resourcing Texans of faith. Make sure you sign up for the webinar linked in the show notes for a more in-depth conversation and opportunity to ask questions. I said it at the top, and I'll say it again now. If you care about immigration issues or other issues, it's vital that you participate in and promote the primary elections, which begin in Texas next week. We have a lot of work to do to improve public policy outcomes in Texas, and I know Texans of faith will be ready for the challenge. We look forward to partnering with you. If you have questions or ideas for the program, please let me know. You can reach me at scott@texasimpact.org. I also hope you'll support this podcast by subscribing, sharing, or by joining Texas Impact as a member to support this podcast and the work of Texas Impact year-round. So with that, I think it's time to close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.